Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Thank you. And let me just say, we are coming up on a remarkable moment. In just a short time, the United States will mark 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a document filled with bold language about liberty, equality, and human dignity. Welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. You know, for 10 years now, the Not Old Better Show has celebrated health, wellness, culture, history, and the stories that remind us we're not old, we're better now. As America commemorates 250 years of independence in 2026, this special series offers a dynamic explanation of America's past, present, and future. Explore the people, ideas, conflicts, and aspirations that have shaped America and how the past informs the challenges and possibilities ahead. At 250, America is still young enough to dream and seasoned enough to know that freedom asks something of every generation. Through our Smithsonian Associates interview series, we invite you to hear that story and more stories with a fresh perspective, honest reflection, and renewed purpose. In this series, we're stepping back, not to settle history, but to explore it, to look at the places, the people, and the moments that have shaped who we are and who we're still becoming. Today, we begin not in a lecture hall, but on the road, because Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Dr. Beverly Gage has taken a different approach. She's traveled across the country, 13 places, as a matter of fact, 13 moments, visiting the sites where Americans don't just learn history, they experience it, they question it, and yes, sometimes even argue about it. From Philadelphia, where the nation began, to places like Mound Bayou, Mississippi, to Dearborn, Michigan, and even to Disneyland, where the American story takes on a life of its own. Dr. Beverly Gage's new book, This Land Is Your Land, invites us to see history not as something fixed, but as something we're still shaping. And maybe that's the real question for all of us, especially now. Can we face the full, complicated truth of our past and still find a way forward together? Let's find out. Welcome to a special series from Smithsonian Associates and the Not Old Better Show. Please join me in welcoming historian, author, Pulitzer Prize winner, and our guide for this journey across America at 250, Dr. Beverly Gage. Smithsonian Associate Dr. Beverly Gage is our guest today, kicking off our America 250. Dr. Gage, it is wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is really going to be great. Of course, we're going to talk about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, but we are also talking about this wonderful new book of yours, This Land Is Your Land. You've shared it with me. I've just enjoyed it thoroughly. I know our audience will. We are going to have links so that our audience can find out more about the book. I understand April is its release date, so we will put all of that information into our show notes. But I loved it. This Land Is Your Land, a road trip through U.S. history. What a really interesting take on U.S. history. And I want to talk about the 13 stops that you made, because it's interesting to me that it wasn't always about the geography. It was about the kind of 13 defining moments in American history. And so I wonder if you just tell us briefly what it was that led you to a decision about this being the best way to tell America at its 250th story. And what was it about a journey across America that really sparked your interest in kind of this subject in that way?
This was, in some ways, a labor of love kind of book. I wanted to do something connected to the 250th. I loved going on these kinds of history road trips with my son when he was little.
This is great.
And
Yeah.
so I thought, why not combine them? Since I teach the 20th century, I didn't want the 250th to be just about the revolution and the founders. I wanted to find a way to engage the whole sweep of American history. And as you say, that's what the book does. Every chapter is a place, but also a moment in time that raised some big set of dilemmas for the country and that got, those dilemmas got localized in one place. And so that's how the book is structured. It does have the road trip story. You start on one coast and you end on the other, but it zigzags around a lot in between, both in time and in place.
Just brilliantly done. Again, congratulations on your work, and we so appreciate your time. It really feels like we're in the passenger seat with you, that this sense of movement across America really kind of changes how we see everything. Were you feeling that too, that as you were driving, this is just kind of a new look?
I was feeling it. So when you drive around, you just get a very different sense than if you sit kind of absorbing the news of your fellow citizens and others through screens. And I really wanted to get away from that. There's too much of that, I think. And it reminds you a couple of things: how big this country is, how diverse it is, how interesting it is, and how mobile it is, and really has been for a long time. Every chapter of the book, and this was not something I had planned when I started writing, but every chapter of the book now starts with some fellow historical traveler who set out to see the country or to move from one place to another in their own way. And that's because I was very attuned to that theme, but I just saw it come up again and again and again. So George Washington is the first road tripper in the book.
Great choice. Great choice. Another really great choice, I thought, and I want to talk about both. So yes, George Washington, Philadelphia show up as, kind of essentials here. But the other interesting thing I thought was Disneyland as a choice. And I wonder if you tell us a little bit about that choice and kind of what was it about the history of America and Disneyland that came together in a way that was one of the 13 spots? Because I just thought, as I looked at it and read the book, just brilliant. Great connection.
Disneyland is one of the big places that I go, but I tried to do a variety of things. There are national park sites, there are
Yeah.
privately owned sites, there are little teeny tiny things in little teeny tiny places that no one's heard of. And then there are, big behemoths like Disneyland, which, as you say, most
Right.
people don't think of as a historic site. But Walt Disney really was one of our great historical myth makers in American history. And when Disneyland was created in 1955, it was really themed around America, American patriotism, American history. And if you look at the architecture of Disneyland today, you can still see that. So Main Street, USA is supposed to be hearkening back to the McKinley era, the turn of the century, which Walt Disney in the 1950s was looking back at the age of his own childhood and saying, oh, things were so great then, and we've really gone into some level of decline now, which is what, practically everybody always thinks about history. Frontierland is this big story about American expansionism. Now, Walt Disney had a very triumphal interpretation of all of this, but even today, when you walk into Disneyland, one of the first things that's going on is an audio animatronic stage show with Abraham Lincoln, and that's because Walt Disney was really obsessed with Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. So I admit that most people do not go to Disneyland seeking out these weird little bits of history, but they are in fact there, and it's really important to the ethos of the whole place.
It's a very memorable element because as I was reading, I thought American history isn't quite. You touch on this. It is active and even theatrical, and Walt Disney, of course, is bringing that to life, just as you suggested. So I wonder if you talk a little bit for a moment about some of these places where, we're not just necessarily learning about history, but we're even arguing about it to a certain extent. And I wonder if you found that these places do bring us together ultimately, And if that's important as we remember our history, especially at 250.
Lots of these places are deep in the kinds of historical and interpretive debates that are going on in the country about what really matters, what makes someone American, which parts of history do you want to emphasize or not emphasize. One impulse for me in doing the book is that I didn't really like the direction that our public historical discourse has been going, which is a very all or nothing direction where you have lots of people saying the only way you can be a patriot and talk about history is to say all the best things the country ever did. And then there are lots of people who feel that the only things that matter are the worst parts of American history. And in fact, have rejected the idea of marking a moment like the 250th altogether. And I just really wanted to find a way to bring some of those stories together, to put them in conversation with each other, to put them in contest with each other, because as you say, it really is that debate, that contest, that is history. That's what the history is.
You mentioned your son, and I wonder, as you were traveling, did you notice any? Our audience is many of whom are kind of about my age. I'm 69, and many of us are on second acts, and there's a generational, kind of component to the world. I think. Did you notice any generational differences as you were traveling? Kind of an American, perhaps a younger generational take on some of these historic places versus an older interpretation?
My big hope is that people will read this book and then head out on the road with their families. As you
Hmm.
note,
Yeah.
my son and I did a lot of this traveling together. He shows up periodically in the book. It was just a great thing, and I hope that other
Yeah.
people follow that. Yeah, I would say there are some generational differences, and they aren't just the living generations, right? They're also the generations of people earlier who founded these historical sites. So, someplace like Colonial Williamsburg, which was funded by John D. Rockefeller in the 1920s, looks at 18th century Virginia. And it used to have, a very, I guess we would say, whitewashed version of history in certain ways. And that has adapted and changed over time as people's ideas about what matters in history have changed over time. I was doing a lot of my traveling during the weekday in the middle of the day. So it's tended to be highly populated by older people. And in some places, of course, I was the only person there. So a lot of these little historic sites that I love don't tend to be huge population draws.
Yeah. I want to talk for just a moment about this gap between the ideals of our country originally and the reality. And there just is this powerful thread running through your work about the distance between 1776 and the reality that followed. For all of us, was there one stop along the way where you really felt that gap was especially apparent and vivid to you?
I was really struck during my trips to Alabama and Mississippi on the Civil Rights Trail. I was really struck by how many of the cities that were flashpoints in the Civil Rights era, that are these kind of legendary places now in the American imagination, how neglected and in decline some of them have become in the years since that. So you look at Birmingham, Alabama, or Selma, Alabama, or Jackson, Mississippi, and they're really struggling cities. And so we allow them into the history books and, in fact, into historical tourism at these kind of high moments of reform and racial reconciliation and racial contest. But we don't tend to tell the story about what happened after 1963 or 1965. And so there, I think I could see some stark realities alongside some kind of high-flying rhetoric.
I want to talk about a couple of the quieter places, perhaps. These are places that don't necessarily make the front page of American history. Mound Bayou, Louisiana, and then Dearborn, Michigan, perhaps less familiar to so many, but incredibly telling locations. What did those communities reveal about America today that maybe some of the other more famous landmarks miss?
Well, I think you picked two great ones because I, of course, loved the places that were a little off the beaten
Hmm.
path.
Hmm.
And Dearborn
Yeah.
and Mound Bayou are a great contrast in the ways that Americans engage with history. Dearborn is the headquarters of the Ford Motor Company, and it's my chapter on the 1920s and 1930s on America's industrial surge. And it's really about Henry Ford himself, who was not only such an architect of American industry, but was also very invested in telling his own version of American history. So when you go there, you can go to the River Rouge, which was the largest industrial facility in the world at the time. So it was sort of Henry Ford's vertical integration masterpiece, and it's an amazing thing to see. And then there's also a set of museums, both an outdoor living history village and then an indoor museum that Henry Ford funded because he wanted to tell American history his way. So those are big sites there, and what this looks like a little bit from the top down in Henry Ford's case. Mound Bayou, a totally different example, little place in the Mississippi Delta. I wasn't even planning to visit Mound Bayou, but I knew a little bit about its history. And when I realized I was right next to it, I went into the town. And it was for several decades during the height of Jim Crow, one of the few autonomous, prosperous, self governing Black communities in the Delta. And so it's still there as a small town that is trying to revive and engage its own history from the bottom up. So Henry Ford took his millions and put his stamp on history from the top down. Mound Bayou is trying to recreate all of its history as really a community enterprise.
I said Louisiana. I apologize for that. Mississippi, and I want
Sounds
to
like
get
a
these
name that should be
locations
in
correct.
Louisiana.
Well, these are important places, and you've done such a great job at telling these stories, and so I really want to get all of that correct. This is the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series commemorating 250 years of independence in 2026. Anniversaries matter. Meaning matters more. History is never just behind us. Sometimes it sits right beside us, asking who we are, what we value, and what we owe the future. Stay with us as we talk with Dr. Beverly Gage about this wonderful Smithsonian Associates program, a conversation on the people, ideas, and moments that still call to us to be better. Smithsonian Associate Dr. Beverly Gage rejoins us. She's got a powerful perspective on that tension between past and future, between memory and meaning. And what she says next might just challenge the way you see this moment in American life. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Our guest today, of course, is Smithsonian Associate Dr. Beverly Gage, who has written just this wonderful book, This Land is Your Land, a road trip through U.S. history. I looked this up about 80 years ago. Woody Guthrie wrote that wonderful song, This Land is Your Land. And, of course, the newest book, This Land is Your Land, from our guest today, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Dr. Beverly Gage, is just telling this fantastic story. And it is certainly leading us into this new series with Smithsonian about our 250th birthday. I just thought the book was such a wonderful road trip and just a great way to kind of kick off our series, Dr. Gage. And I want to ask you about the past in the sense of it being better, perhaps, than the future. And in the book, you write so beautifully about this American anxiety that goes on, that maybe the past was better than the future. And certainly for many in our audience, we tend to look back fondly, and but yet the future is just so crucial. So I wonder if you tell us a little bit about after now where you sit, after tracing these 13 historical moments for America, where do you land on that question? Is the past perhaps brighter?
Well, as you say, that question itself has a history. And the book opens at Independence Hall, and it opens with this question that Benjamin Franklin is said to have asked right after the Constitutional Convention, right? So at the moment of the country's founding, and he says, is the sun rising or setting on this nation? And I think people have been asking that question ever since. Of course, the answer is, well, it depends on what you value and how you're measuring better or worse or rising or setting. But I do think that one thing that both studying history and then getting out there on the road and exploring it can help do is kind of give you a little sense that people have gone through lots of things in the past. They've had these anxieties before. There have been major crises. People have been worried, and you see these characters all over the book. People who are worried about American decline or worried that they're not living up to the ideals of the country. And so I think even having that grounding can help give a little perspective to our own moment. And I tend to find history in a strange way to be sort of comforting because, it's a reminder your problems are probably not the biggest problems that have ever existed. And then it also gives you some tools for thinking about it and doing something about it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I really got that certainly from the book. The book never feels in any way cynical about our future. And I thought too that, with regard to this kind of idea of theatricality, I want to get back for just a moment. When we think about Washington's tent, we think about the Alamo and even Disneyland. There's this sense that perhaps we're not just preserving history, that we do stage it a little bit. And I wonder what that says about us and how we want to see ourselves kind of in the future.
Well, that's what's so interesting about going to the sites, right?
Yeah.
Is that there is no kind of pure link to the past. Now, it's interesting to be there and to see the landscape and to see the buildings, and it helps you imagine the past. But these are, of course, modern interpretations. They're in conversation with the past, but they are not the past themselves. And Americans love to stage a heroic past. That's a lot of what you see at sites. I don't know that that's especially unique to the United States. It's worth having some fun with it and then approaching it with a little skepticism too, I think.
Yes. And I want to talk about something that I think our listeners do feel very, very personally, as many are over the age of 50 and 60. They've lived through all of these decades of change. They've seen our history unfold in real time. And I wonder if you talk for a moment a little bit about how you hope they do see themselves reflected in this journey, because I think that's important as we read and learn and think about our 250th and look forward even, kind of how we see ourselves going forward as a part of this.
Well, this is a book, and I will say this on this podcast in particular. This is a book that is very much about a middle-aged person's journey into not only the country's past, but a little bit of my own past, and trying to make sense of, I'm in my mid-50s now, and trying to make sense of kind of where I am in relation to all of this history, too. So I'm a scholar, I'm a traveler, I'm a citizen, and then I'm just a person who's getting older, and, that the climb to the Hilltop Monument it's a little harder than it once was. So, I think that there are lots of ways in which getting to middle age or even older than that can help you see history becoming history. In my normal activities, I am a college professor. And one of the things that's funny about that is you get older, but the students stay the same age because they're just new ones all the time. But it's really fascinating to see what they think is history, which is now very much my own lived experience
Hmm.
versus what I do. Now, in terms of historical monuments, there still aren't too many of them over the last 30 years, especially. But I do get up to the Reagan Library in the 1980s is about as late as the book gets. That's one of the last stops on the way.
I think you have an upcoming work on Reagan planned too. Am I right about that? You of course wrote the wonderful book G-Men. And are you doing something on Reagan coming up?
I am. That's my
Yep.
next big project. And I didn't want to go from one giant book to the next giant book. So I wanted to do something a little shorter in between that would get me out of the office.
Well, I'll just selfishly say, as that work all comes together, we'd love to have you back. Just a couple of kind of final questions for you, Dr. Gage, because I know you're very busy and we sure appreciate your generous time. So I wonder, what the 13 chapters, what each one of these places kind of looks like when we look to our shared future on our next stop. What might some of that ask of us even?
Well, I think one thing that it asks is that we be in conversation with each other. One of the themes of the book is that actually this is not a country of, isolated communities or totally red and totally blue places, that this is a common history that has been created in conversation, in contest with each other. And so I guess I would really like people to approach each other with some curiosity. And I hope that this mechanism of the road trip can help fuel some of that curiosity, because whether we like it or not, and this is really the way the book ends, we are in fact all here together and we are all co-creating what's going on. And so the book is a way to sort of be curious about places that you might not live and people that you might not otherwise be in contact with.
Final question, but I wonder if you'd tell us just in your experience and kind of after your travels, are you hopeful? Are you confident about some of these next steps, or are you cautious about where we are at America 250?
Can I be both?
You can be both. Most definitely.
Hopeful and cautious.
Yes.
I think that's the only way to be.
Yes.
One of the things that I did try to do in the book was to find characters. There's a chapter on upstate New York in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, for instance. And that's just full of people like Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony and ultimately John Brown, who are looking out at the country. They're trying to figure out how to change it, but how to take the tools that are at their hand, all of these American traditions and ideas, and really make use of them. So I do hope the book is useful in that way as well.
So nice of you to join us. Of course, Smithsonian Associate Dr. Beverly Gage, author of this fantastic book, This Land Is Your Land, a road trip through U.S. history. Dr. Gage will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. We'll have links to where you can find out more information about her work, her book, and her upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. Dr. Gage, again, such a pleasure. I will look forward to talking to you about Ronald Reagan, and I'll look forward to your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. But thanks for being so generous today. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, Dr. Gage.
Thanks. I had a great time.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series commemorating 250 years of independence in 2026 on radio and podcast. To hear more about today's stories, catch our new Smithsonian Associates interview series, and enjoy our extensive back catalog of previous shows, please visit notold-better.com. My thanks to historian, author, Pulitzer Prize winner Dr. Beverly Gage, who will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes for more details on Dr. Gage and her upcoming presentation. If you've enjoyed this show, you can find out everything else about us on social media, including behind-the-scenes looks on X at Not Old Better, on Instagram at Not Old Better. This is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelzang. Thanks for spending this time with us. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series commemorating 250 years of independence in 2026. It all reminds us we're getting better, not just older, because 250 years later, better is still a conversation worth having. Let's talk about better. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. Join us again next time as we deep dive into some of the most fascinating real-life stories from across the world, all focused on this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on community radio.